Good morning, everybody. We're expecting a few more, but I'll get started because I appreciate it's 8 o'clock, just gone 8 o'clock in the UK, and looking at the participants, I know at least two of you, I think it's the middle of the night in Latin America, so I'm sure you don't want to wait any longer than you have to. Thank you very much for joining us for the next webinar in Padworth's Masterclass webinar series. In this webinar, we will focus on, as you can see on the screen now, hopefully, the extended project qualification. This is the fourth webinar now in a series that we've been running since May. As I think many of you are aware, I appreciate that a number of you have joined all or some of the previous webinars. And what we're trying to do during this period of lockdown is obviously to continue to make contact with our agents around the world, educate them on some of the programs and initiatives that we're pursuing at Padworth, and hopefully to share information that is also helpful for you, which in turn you can share with your clients. Just quickly on the introductions, my name, as I think you're aware, is Mark Jeans. I'm one of the directors at Padworth and also Bishopstroke College. We also today have Lorraine Atkins, our principal, who will lead you through today's discussion, and James Burnett on the call from Thailand. And James, as many of you know, has had lots of experience in this sort of area over the years, advising international students on progression to university. I've covered some of this already in terms of this context slide, but the topic today is the EPQ, the Extended Project Qualification. According to UCAS, the EPQ helps students develop and demonstrate their project management skills and provides opportunities for extended writing, both of which are highly valued for progression to higher education and employment. The EPQ is something that we have recently relaunched at Padworth for our Year 12 and Year 13 students, and we think it's an important part of their overall development and an important part of their application in terms of presenting themselves to universities beyond Padworth. What we'd like to cover today is address the following questions. So what is the EPQ? How is the EPQ assessed? How is it viewed by universities? And what is the EPQ study timeline at Padworth? In keeping with previous webinars, I put everybody on mute except those that are talking. We'll take you through the materials, and at the end we'll have a Q&A session where I suggest we use the chat function. After the webinar, we will then share the materials with any of the details from the Q&A. And of course, as always, we're available for one-on-one discussions, either with yourselves or with any of your clients, should you so wish to discuss this topic further. So this is just the agenda, as I mentioned. We'll start off with what is the EPQ, and I'll now hand over to Lorraine.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Okay, what is the EPQ? The EPQ is a standalone qualification which sits alongside A-levels. It is equivalent to half an A-level, and just like A-levels, is graded from A star to E. What the EPQ sets out to do is it sets out to buy into the passion of a Year 12 and 13 student, and it allows them to do some extended work in a variety of ways. It's not just a straight essay, as we'll come on to, and it allows them to investigate that particular theme or topic and really develop that sort of beginning foundation for what they probably will do on their university course. They can fit their project, their EPQ, around their particular A-level choices and actually what they want to do at university. They need to manage their time. The key to the EPQ is finding something that you're passionate about and doing the research and managing your time around that. It is 100% coursework. There is no exam in this. And it takes the students a significant amount of time. They have to produce a report with findings from their investigational study. It's about 5,000 words in length, so it is very, very similar to what they will do as an undergraduate. They could do something and create sort of an artifact. They could actually use it for some charitable event or performance. And about 30,000 students a year actually do the EPQ. And it is awarded by a number of examination boards that you probably already know, like AQA, Edexcel and OCR. The majority of the students, as you can see from this graph, take the EPQ alongside 3 A levels. It is usually students who have a reasonable level of academic interest. It is quite a lot of work to do alongside 4 or 5 A levels, and the majority of students who may get to the end of year 12 having studied 4 subjects may well decide to drop one subject and continue with an EPQ instead. A high number, as you can see here, of EPQ students progress on to what we would probably consider to be higher level universities like the Russell Group. And if you see here, you know, of the students who do an EPQ, 42.4% go on to a Russell Group university. And we will talk more in a minute about the characteristics of a good student who does well on an EPQ. There are other groups of university who also accept students who've done an EPQ, but as you can see, the vast majority are Russell Group. Those students who perform well at the EPQ, there is a very strong correlation with how they do in their degree, which is, I believe, really interesting. If you look at the students who get an A star in their EPQ, nearly 40% of them actually get a first at university. As we'll see in a minute, there is a very, very strong correlation with the students who can do an EPQ and how you write your undergraduate dissertation. Okay, what does it provide for the student? It certainly allows them to start that research process. It allows them to take ownership of their own learning, and that's a really good skill for a student of this age to have. It allows them to take a task and it allows them to work with it and develop their own learning. It also enables them to become critical and reflective about what worked and how they would improve their research if they were to do it again. And this is so valuable for a year 12 and 13 student. They obviously have a series of decisions to make. They have problem solving skills. They need to plan their time. And one of the biggest things for a student doing an EPQ is getting time management right. It is not a qualification that you can do and you can sit up all night the night before and just write your essay. The student has to show, and we'll look at the timeline in a minute, has to really show that it is something that they have slowly been perfecting and going through their research, that they've critically thought about it, they've analysed the results, and they've evaluated what they've done, and also it involves presentation skills. What we then get is a student that is confident at producing a piece of research. They are very good then at managing their time, and they can use technology within their study. They have a series of research skills that they can adopt. They've got to be creative, because the way that the EPQ is marked It isn't a straight written essay. They've got to bring in research reading, they've got to bring in diagrams, and they've got to show some real initiative, which is good for them, very good for them. And in terms of what they learn from students that I've met, what they've learned from the process, not just about the topic, but the actual process of going through it, gives them a high level of confidence. And it means that when they are talking to university tutors, if they've got interviews, they can really show their own personal aspirations for future study, and use it also, you know, when they're applying for jobs. There are transferable skills. I cannot emphasize enough the transferable skills within the EPQ, and it is so valuable that they can do all this research, manage their time, actually write up what they've done, and then present. There are a whole wide range of skills that these students gain from this. Okay, so the EPQ actually has what we call guided learning hours. It is not a taught qualification. They're obviously at the beginning. There are formal sort of lessons on exactly what the EPQ is, what they have to achieve with it. But a lot of the time is personal independent time, and they check in with a mentor or a tutor on this, but the tutor does not actually teach them in a way that they're taught for their A-levels. In terms of the taught element, about 30 hours of that 120 hours, so 25% of the course is a taught element. The other 90 hours are independent learning time. And it is something that, you know, it's a continual week by week process that those students, as I've said, have to notch up their research, and they have to keep a log of what they're doing so that they can discuss it with their mentor and actually show on a week by week basis how they're developing those research skills to be able to write their essay. Okay, as I've referenced some of the skills that you need, but you know, a student who is doing an EPQ needs to be able to manage a project. I cannot emphasize enough the requirement to be able to time manage. They need a very clear view of what they're going to do each week and how they're going to achieve their eventual outcome, and how they're going to plan their time. It's no good just sort of thinking that you can work it in around everything. You actually need to slot in a time for your EPQ every week. What it does teach them, it teaches them how to use text. They have to usually have researched about 20 pieces of other people's research. It also shows them that you cannot plagiarize. It is really, really good that they learn how to use referencing systems before they actually go to university and start their sort of essay writing there. There are a range of primary and secondary research methods that they need. Obviously, that might well lead into using statistics as well. So it's a whole combination of research, writing, and understanding that sometimes that they can collect data, and other times that they might need to use other people's data. Obviously, they have to learn how to use a library and perhaps not rely on Wikipedia. They've got to be able to write their essay and obviously do a presentation for their audience. So they've got to learn how to do a formal academic piece of writing. And what a lot of the marks are given for is that critical evaluation of what they've used, how useful it was, and what they have taken from it. So they've got to learn to be critical and not just take it that what is written is absolutely the only viewpoint. And it is very, very good for them to be able to start using this sort of level of evaluation and reflect on how much they've met their own aims and objectives. So they've got a very clear beginning and you know, at the end when they evaluate, did they actually achieve what they set out to achieve? As I've said, a great deal of the EPQ is time management, and they have to keep a log. And there's a clear format of how they keep this log or diary. They can do a blog, which obviously some young people really like, but they have to show that they're building on their research of the topic as they go through. And it is not a short process. And then obviously they can present their work in a wide range of ways. It doesn't have to be a straight essay, but they also at the end, they have to present what their findings and what they did to an audience and be prepared to answer questions from that audience. So what we are doing is with the students, we are creating a research piece, we are getting some writing, and then they've got to actually get up in front of an audience and present. And that's quite tough for the average 17, 18-year-old to be able to do that.
Lorraine, who would normally be in that audience?
I think most people would very happily just say, would you like to invite your friends? You want a friendly audience. Obviously there might be some teachers as well, but you want an audience of about 10 people. You don't want like a sort of lecture theatre of 300, but about 10 people, a couple of members of staff, and usually the student will bring a number of their friends, probably those people who are doing an EPQ as well. And but you expect a level of involvement and interest so that they can answer questions at the end. Okay, so in terms of the EPQ, obviously teachers within the college will fulfill that role as a facilitator or mentor, and they will also have their sort of EPQ supervisor. It may be the same person, it might not. A student can choose any subject they like for this. The teachers will have one-to-one contact, one-to-one sessions with them, and that's on a sort of weekly basis. They will only provide verbal feedback. There is no written feedback. This is the student's own work. And very much it is very different to an A-level essay, and that's one of the big milestones for a student to actually realise that they have the whole ownership of this. A teacher can mentor them and support them, facilitate perhaps the lab for doing some experiments, but it is their own work, and it is for a student to be able to take critiquing of their work and actually argue back with the teacher about why they've gone in that direction, which is really good for the student. Obviously, they need to, certainly by about this point in the year, they need to have got the theme for it. They need to set those very clear milestones. The summer holidays at the end of year 12, before year 13, are a great time to do lots of research and actually really begin to get the EPQ up and running. And then obviously they need to plan how they're going to do maybe experiments, maybe setting up their concert, or I've even seen one where someone has built a teepee out of wood. You know, there are different, what we've got to be aware of, that they can be as creative as they like, and they needn't do the standard research and then write an essay. It can be in many different ways, although probably I think we would all accept actually doing research and writing an essay is perhaps the one that is probably most easy for the student. But they can develop whichever techniques that they like. They have got to have this complete record of what they've done, which is known as a project progression record. They get feedback in that from their peers and experts. They show when they're having meetings with their mentor. They are the ones that take ownership for recording what they've talked about with their mentor, how they're then taking that critique and they're going to develop it. And then they've got to draw conclusions from their project and actually present their outcomes to this audience. It is a really sizable piece of work. And it takes a lot of confidence for a student to come to the end of it. They think, oh, I've written my essay. Actually, writing the essay is only it's not the whole part. Now, what might a student do for an essay? And they can, as you can see on here, there's a whole wide range of things that they could do. How do rockets work? And you can imagine the fun that a student's going to have with that. They're going to go out and they're going to do the general sort of research on what NASA might do, but they could also go out and they could build their own rockets in the garden, and they could shoot them off, and they could draw trajectories and have great fun. Sort of a historian, why did the Paris Commune of 1871 fall? A chemist, I certainly know the chemistry one. To what extent is desalination the solution to water sustainability? And it takes in lab work, it takes in all the research of what countries like Saudi Arabia are doing, and there's also, you know, that high level of how would this work perhaps in a smaller size area, or, you know, how does it work on countrywide? There's a whole range of sizes of how they can research these particular essays. Okay, so how is it assessed? And it's, as I've said, it isn't just the essay in this, it is how you get to the point that you can write your essay and present your findings. The time log of what research they've done is absolutely of fundamental importance. And the confidence at which they can actually talk about their findings and give answers to sensible questions when they do their presentation. Okay, so there are a series of assessment objectives, as you can see on the left-hand side here, AO1 to 4, and this is the really important aspect that a student has to understand, that they have to meet all of these assessment objectives. They have to be very, very clear on the weighting of it, and as you can see, you know, the reviewing of the actual EPQ is worth 35 to 40%, but I will go through it. So they need to obviously identify, design and plan their individual project. Quite often they think that that is, you know, a huge level of importance, and you could sort of equate that with a younger student, you know, when they've got a project to do and they spend half their time doing the front page and colouring it in. In the same way, what a student's got to realise with an EPQ is that they need to organise themselves, but it's not actually that big an overall mark in this. Then they've got to select appropriate resources and actually analyse it and link in how different sources are going to work. As I said, they are expected to have read at least 20 valid, appropriate pieces of research from academics. And that's really, really important, because quite often they're very used to using 2 or 3 textbooks to write an essay, but here they're going away, they're reading papers by people. They could be, you know, actually doing reading undergraduate reading lists almost on whatever their topic is, and they've got to learn how to not only read but select the appropriate information, and then be able to look at the different sides of the argument and actually present it as their overall view of it. And obviously, they then take this and they use a range of skills and technologies to actually solve the problem that they've set themselves. They've got to then analyse what they've done and critique it. They've got to actually come down with a product that is both sensible and critical, and they evaluate what they would do and how that they would develop that for their own learning in the future. And then obviously they've also got to do this presentation. So when they think they've finished and they've written their essay, or they've done their product, they've done their concert, whatever it is, oh my goodness, now they've got to, in some way, whether it's film, whether it's PowerPoint, they've got to be able to have some kind of overall presentation to an audience, as we've discussed, and they've got to be able to talk about their outcomes and conclusions. So how do universities, and this is a really important thing for a student to understand, how do universities view an EPQ?
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, let me go back.
That's all right. Okay. I cannot emphasize enough how positively universities appreciate a student that's done an EPQ, because what that student is doing is they are showing that they have the skill set that universities want their undergraduates to develop. And it is that rigorous academic research that they will do that universities really like. They will also, and what is lovely for students to realise is many universities obviously have their standard offer, and they are prepared to adjust that offer if the student does well in their EPQ. For example, the desalinization student had an offer of A-star AA from Bath to study chemical engineering, and because if they got an A or an A-star in their EPQ, it was dropped to 3 A's. Now we all know that getting an A-star at A level is quite tough, and it just depends on the day, and to have that flexibility, that dropping of grade because they've done well on their own in this EPQ is really, really useful. Also, I would say for scientists, scientists quite often don't write essays to a great extent. So going through that process of writing a long essay of 5,000 words is a really good process, particularly for a scientist to do, because it is something that they're not like a history student or an economics student. They're not used to writing at length at sort of year 12 and 13 level. When the EPQ results come out, it is really, really a really good way that universities distinguish between students of the same A-level results. So let's say they don't quite meet their exam requirement, but they've done very well in their EPQ. Against another candidate, they're going to stand out because they've already got some of the skill set that they're going to need to develop further during their undergraduate years. And many universities actively encourage applicants to do the EPQ, and I also, or Padworth, would actively encourage them to refer to their EPQ within their personal statement. It is wonderful for those admissions tutors to be able to read that they are researching something as for their EPQ, and they can actually start to reflect on what they've learned so far. And it just gives that extra mile that they can say, oh, this student really does understand what they're going to do when they come here to study. And we've given the example here of a Vietnamese student who had offers from Manchester, Leeds and Birmingham to study management. He did the EPQ. And what that meant was that Manchester offered AAB, and as long as he got a B in his EPQ. And then their normal offer obviously is AAB, and then if he got that B, then it goes down to ABB, similar to sort of the Bath offer that I've talked about. So having that little bit of flex within a university standard offer, because they are prepared to work over a long period of time, actually takes quite a lot of pressure off an A-level student. It helps them not be quite so stressed. Okay, so there's a series of quotes here from different universities saying exactly why they want a student to have an EPQ. So if we take Manchester, the skills students develop through the EPQ are directly relevant to and useful for university level students. I mean, what more can that is such a very clear message. And then Leeds, we recognise the value, efforts and enthusiasm applicants make in the EPQ. Individual academic schools will decide whether they will be using the extended project in their offer making, and we encourage you to provide further information on your project in your personal statement. Now, we've talked about personal statements in this series of webinars, but what better way to show your passion as a year 12-13 student than being able to talk about the EPQ. Most students, as we know, they study 3 A levels. If they're a scientist, it's probably something like maths, physics and chemistry. Here, they're saying, yes, but I'm particularly interested in this aspect of what I've learnt in school, and this is how I've enjoyed developing it. And that just shows the deeper person that's there. Okay, and Padworth's approach to the EPQ. Okay, so we've got a timeline here of when we start working with students with their EPQ. EPQs can be done in year 12 and 13. What we really need to ensure is that a student is mature enough to actually start on this journey, because it is a journey, it takes quite a lot of time, and for them to really get passionate, they've got to have studied part of their A level. So we start working on this in April of year 12, and we get a general sort of registering of interest. We get them to start investigating with their teachers what particular topics they might be interested in, and by now in year 12 they come up with a proposal. And so that over the summer holidays, as I've discussed, they start their research. They come back in September, they see their teachers and confirm that that's what they want to do, what their title is. And they, by November, they produce a project presentation record. So they've documented the meetings. And by the end of the autumn term in year 13, they've got their essay plan sort of ready. They might have written their introduction, and they will, with their mentor, they will be having a review of all the sources that they've used, how they're going to play it. And remember that these students are also tying this in with studying for their A-levels. They've got their mock exams in the January. So they've got to do a lot of work by the December, so that when they submit their final essay in February, that they are really truly happy. Their research is done and they're happy with what they've written. And then at the end of what would be the spring term of year 13, they would present their findings to the audience, and it's done, it's out of the way. That that qualification that's half an A level is done, and then they can just then focus over the Easter holidays and for the rest of the summer term in year 13 on their A level examination. Here's another way of showing that, and what it shows is, the real longevity of their research for this. It isn't something that they can do overnight, and we have very clear deadlines that we ask the students to meet. Obviously, their mentor will be looking at what they're doing. But what you do find is that many students will initially be very interested in doing this, and but they may well drop off along the way because they haven't yet got the maturity to follow this through. But a good student who is very happy to plod along and set time, a well-organized student will do very well at this.
I think that's officially the end of the materials we wanted to present. Thank you, Lorraine. You can have a glass of water now.
Thank you.
I'll stop the screen share. Before I stop the screen share, I'll just show one last slide, which is the next webinar in our series is again in a couple of weeks' time on Thursday, the 2nd of July. We're going to be joined by NC UK, who will actually lead the discussion, and we'll talk through the NC UK International Foundation Year Programme and the NC UK partner universities. So we'll be sharing more details in due course, but please join us on the 2nd of July if that topic is of interest. Q&A, we'll use the chat function as I mentioned. So if you do have questions, please use the chat function and we'll address them obviously amongst us as best we can. Right, so first question from Suki. Suki, I hope you're well, hope everything's okay in China. Do we need to do a presentation for a dissertation, is the first question.
For an EPQ, definitely at the end, after they have done their log and written their essay, they do have to do a presentation. That is all part of the evaluation. They've got to be able to communicate what they've researched, and they've got to be able to take questions and actively show that they themselves did the research and that they are confident in talking about the findings.
Thank you. How will the EPQ fit in an Oxbridge application, given that the deadline is the middle of October for Oxbridge? That's a good question.
I mean, they can still follow the same timeline that we use at Padworth. It does mean that they will have got all of their research done by the October deadline. So for a student, they can write in their personal statement, and it's very much what an Oxford or Cambridge admissions tutor would be very interested in, and it would definitely be something that they would ask them quite a lot of questions on at interview. So I think it would be a very positive thing. It doesn't matter that it's not fully written. Anybody interviewing them would understand that, but they would be more interested in what research that particular student has done and how they look to develop it, what their findings are so far.
Next question from Tatiana. Is there any reason why we do not do the presentation until the spring in year 13? In this way, they don't have the confirmed EPQ grade by the time of the UCAS application.
Yeah, it's something that we've decided to do in this sort of timeline here, and as you've hinted, different places have different timelines. Partly, as I've said before, because what we want to do is to make that student as mature in their study skills, in their writing style as they possibly can be, so that they're sort of as far as near as we can get to their peak in their time with us when they do it. If they are a student that can manage their time, it should not create significant stress on that student to present in the spring. And this is all part of where that relationship with their mentor and making sure that they are working in an orderly fashion works well.
Okay, and Lorraine, am I right in saying that, just on the same question, if someone has completed the EPQ before they submit their application to UCAS, they could indicate the grade they achieved on the EPQ on their UCAS application?
Yes, and obviously that would be very positive for them. We've just taken the decision as a college that they wouldn't do their EPQ until year 13.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Deborah. Deborah, I hope you're well. EPQ is just for sixth form. Is it possible for a student that may be applying from another country? I think what you're asking, Deborah, is can a student who's not in the sixth form do the EPQ, or not in the sixth form in the UK? So, Lorraine, are we aware whether you could do the EPQ as a standalone sort of project, or does it have to be something that your school is sponsoring you to do as such?
Wow, I must apologise. I don't know the answer to that, because the students tend to do it with their A levels. I don't know. James, do you know? It's something that I can come back to you.
Sorry, James, let me unmute you. Looks like you're still muted.
It's an external qualification, so it's I think it's Pearson and OCR, isn't it? So presumably you have to enter through a centre anyway. I mean, I know you can enter for A levels as a private candidate, but it wouldn't be able to be moderated then, or there wouldn't be this sort of verification. So I think you probably have to enter through a centre.
Okay, that makes sense.
But I'm not 100% sure of that.
Okay, we can check, Deborah, and just see if we can find out anything more on that particular question. Would it be fair to say that if the student's subject choice is lacking the essay-based subjects, EPQ could be the way to demonstrate those skills? I think the answer is probably yes, but Lorraine or James, anything to add to that?
Well, I completely agree. I mean, the example of a science student who perhaps is doing much shorter pieces of writing is an ideal way for a student of that particular skill set to actually show that they can write as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Any more questions from anybody?
I mean, Lorraine, I actually had a question, which was, how much guidance are you giving the students on their choice of topic for the EPQ? Or do they come, I mean, the way you've done it in the past, have they come to you and said, this is what I'm interested in? Or do you try and steer in directions that you think would be beneficial for them?
It's a bit, no, I'm going to sit on the fence here. It's a bit of both. Obviously, they choose which particular area that they would like to investigate. Or start off with the subject. What subject do you want to do? And then which particular part of that subject area would you like to investigate? And you can see how all of this works with the personal statement brilliantly, because normally they're struggling at the beginning of year 13, perhaps to sort of identify what their passion is. Here, with the EPQ, they can then sort of say, well, I want this. I would recommend that when they write their essay, that they put the title as a question, because then they've got something to actually answer. They can have a statement, but I think a title with a question is definitely a much easier thing to do. And it also means that it does not affect their grade by having a question that you answer. They can still do really, really well. But having a question doesn't, by actually coming to an answer or a considered answer, doesn't leave them sort of in limbo.
Question from me, Lorraine. We've mentioned that generally the students taking the EPQ will be taking it alongside 3 A levels, and that is the norm, or will be the norm at Padworth, and is consistent with the market sort of trends that we shared in the presentation. Would we normally look at a student's predicted grades and guide them as to whether we felt they would be able to cope with the additional workload of the EPQ? And if that was the case, what sort of level of sort of predicted grades would we normally expect a student to be tracking towards for us to decide or think that they would be able to cope with the EPQ?
Yeah, in a perfect world, if you had a student that was predicted 3 A's, then they are going to do they usually do very well on an EPQ. Obviously not all students are that level, but if they are struggling with their 3 A levels, I would not recommend an EPQ. And in the same way that, you know, if they are adamant that they want to do 4 A levels, unless they're an exceptional student, and that's where the joy of a smaller college like Padworth means that you do know your students very well. What we don't want to do is we don't want them to burn out too soon, but we would have to be mindful about what the student was good at. But we might also look at, it might be that a student isn't terribly good in an examination. Now, you know, I know a student here now, absolutely superb student, completely goes to pieces in the exam room. So an EPQ for them would be an ideal way of actually showing how that they are a good student and how that they can use all of these research skills and evaluation to produce a piece of serious academic work. So we like to take individuals and actually look at them and see how they would cope with it. And that's one of the joys of Padworth. We know our students very well.
Thank you. Next question. Is it more helpful or beneficial to find a topic that is outstanding or a topic that I am interested in? So I think probably rephrase the question. Should I focus on something if I'm doing an EPQ that I'm interested in, or a topic that might come across as more impressive?
This is purely my take on this. I would go for something that you're interested in. That passion to study at a long length of time comes from interest, and actually it will be outstanding. If you're really passionate about something, you can make it outstanding, and it's got to be the student. It is definitely not something that a teacher, a parent, an agent, a guardian, it has got to be that student's passion that comes through.
Thank you. Next question from Tatiana. Lorraine, you did mention that the universities do value the EPQ. In your experience, has a situation arisen where universities like Imperial, UCL, LSE drop their requirements on condition of, say, an A grade in the EPQ? So we had some examples earlier. I think your son's example at Bath, and James's example from one of his students that was going to Manchester, where the grade offer was reduced by 1 grade. Are we familiar with whether some of the top 5, the big 5 universities would similarly take a similar approach? And that might be for Lorraine or James, that one, I guess. James?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself again. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things is if you look at the individual universities' websites, on their entrance requirements, they all very clearly say what their policy is on EPQs. So, you know, I think that, you know, the information is there. It doesn't come as a surprise whether they'll lower the grade or not. You know, it's on the website, it's on the entrance requirements. You can access that through the UCAS course search, but each one will state their policy and what grades they would expect in order to lower the standard offer. And it's also on most of the department websites in the universities. So I think it's a question of looking individually at each university, but it's very transparent what their policy is.
And the only other thing that I would add is maybe if a university is trying to differentiate between 2 students, having the EPQ maybe the deciding factor.
And I think on the personal statement, you know, whether it's relevant to the course they're applying for or not, you know, there are still the qualities that they gain from it. And I think, you know, justifying doing an EPQ, even if it's something totally different from what they're applying for at university, justifying it in terms of the research skills and the self-motivation and the self-learning as preparation for university, you know, it's going to add weight to that personal statement.
Any more questions from anybody at this stage? Yes, Ivan. Good morning, Ivan. Good afternoon. Will the EPQ benefit students taking the NC UK International Foundation Year Programme? That's a good question.
I think it would be quite tough when you consider that an NC UK student is coming into us, if they're doing it from September to June, they're coming in sort of almost nearly 6 months behind the rest of our students to do this. They've got quite a lot of work to do on the NC UK programme already. It probably would be an incredibly big ask, and actually for universities looking at NC UK students, they probably would just like them to get exceptional marks in the programme and not necessarily do an EPQ. But that doesn't mean to say they can't do one.
I guess, Lorraine, there could be a situation where the student was applying to do the NC UK IFY programme and was applying sufficiently in advance and was raising that question during the interview process for us to know that they were interested, and we could potentially help them get the first part of it, the research part, progressed before they started, and obviously continuing with that during the summer before they started, so that they wouldn't be so much on the back foot.
Yes, yes. I mean, that would work, but they would, and obviously we could support them. And one of the joys today is that we all know how we can do online teaching, but yeah, it would take a very motivated student.
Okay. Any more questions from anybody? Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us. Appreciate you sparing the time. I know there's lots of webinars obviously happening at the moment, and there's always a risk with webinar fatigue. So hopefully you found this discussion to be helpful. As I mentioned up front, we will share the materials from today and also a write-up of the questions and answers. And if there are any subsequent questions, obviously do please get in touch with either myself, Lorraine, or James. Our contact details will be in the materials. Thanks again, and have a good day, rest of the day. Enjoy going back to sleep, those of you that it's the middle of the night, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Bye.
Thanks, James. Bye-bye.